All right. Hello, Mike.
Hey, it's
Happy
an
Thursday.
infinite version of me.
Happy
Testing,
Thursday.
testing, testing.
happy Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, and just because we forgot to record, but that's fine. People
Yeah.
forget to watch this too, so it doesn't matter. Um, but I think technically we had an interesting topic, right? We were talking about what do we call it? Critical thinking, and somehow that this term is just been mentioned for the first time ever, as being something we're supposed to be able to do. I mean, I'm being cynical, of course, but right, like it really wasn't. It certainly does not seem to be anything. Well, actually, maybe I can ask your opinion on that. I mean, I wrote a thing once about critical thinking because people who are critical thinkers are deeply unpleasant and unfun to be around. So I'm like, maybe that's why we don't value it too much, because it's like your kids asking why all the time. Sooner or later you're just like, whatever. It's just, that's the way it is, you know?
Well, yeah, maybe I don't really kind of agree with you kind of 100%. I mean, there's maybe types of kind of alpha, leaders that kind of want to be that way. But I also had a very good experience with, I mean, you are into physics. I know personally, a few physicists, like, for example, Otto Rosler, the very famous physicist that shut down CERN because he calculated that the probability of them creating a black hole is not zero, right? So that kind of thing, and extremely pleasant and extremely critical thinker, but great to be around, right? So that,
Okay, good.
so yeah,
Thank you,
that
because
is,
I hope they are. I mean, I hope they're just sort of like curiosity tuned rather than cynically tuned, which I think that's where I have a problem sometimes.
I guess, yeah, and then my word has to be the last one, right? That kind of type, right? So we know a few people like that probably.
Well, and I'll go into the artistic temperament. You often are the only person who has any critical assessment of your work, right? Like you have to do it all and before you can get feedback, And when you do get feedback, you have to contextualize it somehow, right? Because you can't, if you're like, hey, nobody likes it and it sucks, that doesn't mean it's bad, right? That's just,
Yeah.
yeah, it's the
And
way it
that's
goes.
harder and harder, right? So the problem with critical thinking today is that how do you actually evaluate the quality of the information based on which you are doing the analysis? Like I just read that Elon is going to be filtering information that goes to the next generation of Grok and maybe creating some synthetic data sets because I think kind of loose quote, because there is too much garbage, in the training sets right now, right? So who is going to decide what's garbage, what's not, right? Like in this example of the in the economy, right? How do you evaluate like fundamental terms like inflation, for example? How much of the inflation is good? Is inflation at all appropriate? Is deflation as bad as they are kind of trying to tell you, but never define actually what it is? So yeah, so how do you now have a critical analysis, and maybe, God forbid, based on that you're gonna make a political vote, right? Right,
No,
that
no,
will
and
decide
by
the
the
future
way,
of the country, right?
you've been in the United States for a while, but we are also a weird waveform in a way, right? Like we get to behave differently from everybody else, and we do absolutely. I think the more I study economic stuff, because I think it's kind of fascinating, I'm kind of sure that a deflationary model also is more beneficial to everyone, whereas a growth model is beneficial to a few people.
Yeah.
That could be a thing, and it's like, well, are we really going to put everything into the benefit of a few, whereas being stagnant is also being a little bit more we're probably in this with models, I think, because I finally saw it today. People were like, yeah, I think this is probably as good as it's gonna get. Obviously Elon will improve it mightily by just making up a ton of stuff, because the synthetic data thing is slightly hilarious, that like that's what you're gonna train on, like things that
Yes.
kind of look like David Copperfield, or whatever. Or, because I think it's all those, what is it, stochastic, it's noise modeling, right? Like noise is the whole reason this thing works. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, if you didn't have all this noise, then you wouldn't have these models being able to train at all,
Yeah,
right? Because then it would
meaning
just,
distribution, right? Meaning
yeah,
distribution of concepts, right?
right.
So yeah, I mean, definitely. I mean, there is no question about that. And in machine learning community, it's very widely known that if you have only examples of perfect information, like only positive examples, you will not be able to train the model appropriately, because also you need negative examples, you need false positives, you need false negatives, all that stuff, which constitutes a noise, taken together. But you need that stuff. So yeah, there is a field in artificial intelligence called information quality, right? There is conferences on it, and I try to figure out, so how can I actually come up with an information quality model? And I couldn't. I mean, there might be like a very, very narrow application, like, hey, you're gonna do a survey, you're gonna survey your students, and you're gonna just kind of try to figure out, like that quality of that data set, which is kind of like 10 questions, and 50 participants. But beyond that, there's no universal information quality model that we can come up with. I've never heard personally.
Well, but you bring up another kind of big realization I'm starting to have, and why I'm of course very appreciative to have all these models, because I like to go back and forth between all sorts of different models as I'm trying to be a critical thinker, let's call it that, right? I'm trying to think about something. And what's great is that once you come up with a question or a theory or a puzzle, right? Like like I said, I just, this noise thing is kind of counterintuitive. Also, the way we're not geometric anymore. And I'll get it. I think I got into this in a minute, but maybe I'll go down the deep end with you. But the idea of non-geometric space is what we're exploring, right? And geometry is a great idea and good for everybody, but it doesn't actually model reality. It's kind of art, which is great. I like art, right? Like, but it's art. It's an abstraction, right? It's useful to a point, but it doesn't describe the real universe. Yet a lot of theories have had to bend to try to use geometric proofs, Pythagoras and pi, you know what I mean? But that doesn't exist, is the point. Like, that isn't the way the universe really works. Now we've got these things that work this way. So anyway, what I found is, in the more questions I had, the more you come up with a theory and then find out that somebody already came up with that theory. You see what I mean? Like, you have to invent the science to learn the science. So I was going to say, my hero in all this is still Claude Shannon, right? He figured out information theory, right? Or we wouldn't even have computers. And it is just surprise, right? It's only about things outside of the norm. That's what has resonance. That's what is interesting, right? And everything else becomes normalized at some point, and we just start to take these signals. And this makes sense, I think, when we think about the way we think, right? We don't remember everything. God, it would just be the worst, wouldn't it? Like, I got up, I walked down 7 stairs, like, that's, but okay, not to make it worse, that's computer programming. So I think it's interesting now that people are saying, like, we don't need to program computers like that anymore. We can use sort of mental spaces or ideas to program computers. I just watched one of these guys talk about that, and I'm like, yeah, right. Like, computer programming is geometry. It's very, it does what it does. You start with array 0 and da da da. You see what I mean? Like, these are all ways that we've sort of managed to get this thing to work, but there's nothing about it that's real, right? It's this thing we made up. Now we've got this weird bridge because we invented Quake, right? Because we invented Quake, we have this weird bridge that we can take these really complex real things that are all very dependent oriented and messy, and computers can program themselves. And just like I was asking it, by the way, this, speaking of understand, finally, after all these years, what has it been? 25 years? I understand what a float is now. Because that's well, because I kept thinking about it, and then that's what I found out is like a model is just filled with floats. And that as a data type, it's astounding because I thought they were strings, right? Because that's what we get out of it, right? We get nothing but strings out of it, but it's actually all floats. Isn't that the best?
Yeah, that's very interesting. Like it's a number, right? But you cannot compare it to another number. Like for example, you cannot say that, hey, if X is a float and Y is a float, you cannot make a comparison like, hey, is that thing equal to the other one? Because they will always gonna be different, even though it's gonna be like a digit of 100 digits after the decimal point. Yeah, so there is some things like that, and personally I prefer blobs, right? Because a blob can be anything.
No, but that's what I mean. But that's so human. You see what I mean? That's so empirical of you, right? Like you want to impose order, But anyway, and that's fine. But that's the thing. And so I'm actually on this huge side journey to disprove all of geometry as being it isn't fundamental. So we've used it forever because it's useful, right? And and Euclidean space and all these other kind of ideas, right, are useful. But now that we have literal proof of these non-Euclidean spaces doing kind of what we do and kind of what nature does, right? Because if you look at, I don't like quantum computing, but if you look at it, it is simulating the universe pretty much, right? Like that's what it is as a simulator, and it's good at, as I said, these really bizarre cosmological problems, right? Like instead of having to get a telescope to observe something, you could probably just model it now on a quantum computer, right? Like, and that's what it's great at, right? Like here are all the possible permutations of a solar system. Thought about that the other day. Like there can only be so many three-body, or I guess we have a one, but there's only so many waveforms that can exist in these fields, right? And then you could probably figure out its distribution. You could do a lot of stuff without having to look at it. Kind of like computers. Sorry, I know this is like crazy, I should put a big board with a bunch of post-it notes and lines and stuff behind me just to look crazier. But
no, you are getting very close to like two worlds, right? So in the world of Neil Stephenson, like for example, the RIMD model, he created a virtual world that is kind of entailing everything, like probably what Second Life people wanted to be, right? So like you can deposit your money in there, you can hide it in the game, you can protect it, right? So that those virtual kind of, so you can kind of like become a persona, kind of like in a Warcraft style of world, but with a lot more capabilities, right? But then you have William Gibson novels that kind of like go, that's the Tron movie, basically, right? Like you kind of walk in there, and if you want to program something, then maybe you're gonna talk to an avatar that is evil, right? And it's gonna throw those evil discs at you, right? And you're gonna ride those cool motorcycles, right? So I think we are getting close to that, because what is going to be the modality of programming, for example? Is it going to be, open, very small text window with nothing in it, and you're going to start typing? Or maybe, maybe this year, maybe next year, but for sure the Quake people, and IDsoft, and other, they already think, hey, so how about you walk into a system, right? And kind of do more than just throwing grenades or kind of fragging, monsters. What if you can actually do what they do in the Tron movie, and kind of like have a much richer interaction? So I think there is something to it that that you're kind of alluding to.
Well, I mean, we certainly want to predict the future, right? Part of all of this is to try to be predictive, but when I'm put together the talk, and we can do it in our talk as well, which is that it was all accidents. Like, it's almost all accidents. That's what's so weird about it, because I actually, and by the way, you should correct me, because I'm not trying to be a critical thinker, but a little bit, that it's the people like last week we talked about the DeepMind CEO guy. Why I always forget his name is a problem, right? But then there's also Hinton and so forth, that are all now kind of like, I don't know if you call them pundits, but they're always being interviewed. And I'm like, wait a second. First of all, you're the first wave guys, right? Like, you're the ML guys. And the ML thing is geometry. Sorry. This is about complete predictability of very not random systems, but complex systems. And again, nothing off of that, but winning Go is a system that you can win, right? You see what I mean? Like, it has very finite. There's actually a word for this I learned or had to use. Like, when you know the axioms, right? You can know when something is wrong. You see what I mean? Like, it's like chess. This moves like this, and if you don't move it like that, we don't have any idea what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like, you're not this. Now attention comes in. That's not that old, but that's the wave we're all excited about. And these guys are talking about the AI, going to end humanity. You see what I mean? Like, I don't think their perspective is that valuable. That's all. I think that they're just the same old, our world changed, but we don't want it to change. We want to have an opinion about the new world, and I think the new world is far more interesting, right? Generative AI is far more interesting, even if it's sort of capped, and that's fine too. Like, I think you're gonna, get at 80%, and this thing is great, right? It can never do better at. Probably it's very hard for it to do better at creative things like imagery. I think it has a hard time with things that it doesn't have a real training set in, right? Because you could train it in all music, but just think of how insane that is. Because we already have electronic musical instruments. You see what I mean? You can already synthesize every sound pretty much, but sounds are too complicated, in terms of their emotional and whatever resonance, right? There's too much tone. And all those things that make a decision. Like, I was saying the other day, like, my favorite music, for example, is always funk music, because funk leaves out the beat. Like, it drops one of the beats and you fill it in by dancing. You see what I mean? Like, that's where, how do you tell? AI has a hard time saying that the absence of something is something. Right? The absence of things is actually more useful sometimes than the presence of things, because
exactly.
that's a human
that's
thing.
why that's why the first Alien movie was the best, because there was very little of the monsters, right? Your brain was creating the monsters for you. So yeah, definitely I can see that. And I have a hard time to actually come up with an analogy to the generative AI situation. Like, how can we use it so that it's so beneficial? Like to your point, like, hey, what about that dancing component? How can I have a stimulus, right? That will be perfectly combined with some sort of a human activity that will be either so much more efficient or so much more pleasurable, or combined everything together, right? I think that the video gaming people were trying very hard, and they failed, right? Because the only mode that they came up with a very sophisticated engine. Let's say the game engine is the AI system, right? And then what's the activity, right? Well, it's just combat.
Oh, No Man's
Right?
Sky,
Nothing
right?
else.
It's still
Yeah,
struggling, isn't it? It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
here's
But
a
how about, yeah,
billion procedurally generated worlds, yet they're not that interesting.
yeah. So what if we channel that, right, into something, different? Like, hey, like maybe I want to use Quake engine to learn how to play, an instrument, and I want to have as much fun in the process as otherwise I would playing the combat game, right? And
Well,
the same with AI, right?
well, and maybe I don't know if you've heard of it, but there is a really I'm deeply fascinated by this game, even though it's not necessarily the game I like to play, but it's called Blueprints. And the thing is, Blueprints is a RNG style game. Like you have to rely on a certain amount of randomness in order to proceed in the game, but the actual game itself is a game of deep layered narrative, right? Like there's lots and lots and lots of narrative that go deep, deep, deep into a story. So there's 100% a story, a human created story that you have to procedurally uncover through sort of random elements. Yet, as you get better and better and better at the game, you start to realize how then you can now influence those elements, just like deck building, right? Like you influence the elements so you have more of a chance, but the underlying point is always the narrative, right? You're learning everything in order to uncover, well, also, I guess you could call it discovery, or you know what I mean? Like things are gated, but not by knowledge, but by actual mechanics. It's just a fascinating game. Apparently, it's one of those games like many that guy spent 8 years. It's his game. He did everything in it, and that's why those sort of experiences are really hard to randomly generate, even with narrative engines, right? Like most people, I don't think are going to be that impressed by the movie that AI generates, because it's kind of, it is, you see what I mean? It just only reflects how complicated reality is. That's what I keep saying. Like all this other stuff's hard. Making things is hard. Being an artist is hard. Most of my talk kind of ends with the idea of like, it takes years and years and years of practice. And the thing I truly like about this Blueprints game is it is slow. Like a lot of people complain because they have a gamer's mentality that they can just sort of break it through effort. And it's like, no, it will resist every effort to try to go any faster. And the faster you go, try to go, the longer you're going to spend because you're going to miss these points. And I really like that as a design. What would that be called? Parrot, as a design goal, right? Get people to slow down. Seems really, really helpful in many ways, where gaming obviously sometimes tries to get you to press the button faster and faster and faster, you
Yeah.
know? And maybe that's metaphorically good, right? I still think AI is there to let us slow down and spend more time contemplating action and let it do like I just did, literally just did. I got 70 different papers from some conversation with Perplexity about physics. So then I just had GPT put them all into an ordered list, and then I put the ordered list into Notebook LM and said, go and get all these sources, and now we can talk about my theory. So to me, there was somebody playing this game because I just watch people play it. Don't have the patience to play this game. But I really like the strategies that people are playing because the people who are really strategic really do well in this game. That's what's fascinating. Like if you have a strong goal, all these bad things will happen, but yet if you stick to your goal, it's likely to happen, which is fantastic, right? That's kind of a good life lesson that don't blow with the wind. Even if your strategy fails, you're still going to learn something. And then, you'll make a better decision hopefully at once, but it allows you so many decision paths because it's this RNG kind of building game, right? Like, it's like playing Tetris. Think of it like that, right? Like, when you made the wrong move because Tetris is pretty simple, that it's not unfair. It's just asking you to think of how to keep the game going. Anyway, so it does have it has some interesting lessons. Again, maybe that's, what do you think? Is that relevant to anything that you've experienced? I don't know. This is the fun of playing games, maybe.
Yeah, yeah. I have a mixed feelings on everything. I think that the world of gaming, in my experience, is kind of a vehicle, right? I mean, it's so much unused potential that I'm almost kind of can't wait to see maybe those video generating models, if they can be applied. Right now we can have a flick, 5-10 seconds of high quality video, very believable, usually kind of applied to advertising scenarios, but let's say in a couple of years, perhaps this is going to be something that can be real time, where I will be able to interact not just through text, not just through audio, but also through a high quality video with maybe a scenario that I created, or maybe a scenario that is going to be highly parameterized by me, where the engine is going to be kind of like maybe kind of setting up some scenes so that everything will take place on Mars, right? And that's going to be the ramification of the scenario, but everything else, all the other parameters will be on me, right? We want to do zombies, okay, right? We want to play golf, oh, that's great, right? So I think that's something that might have, if that works, right, that will definitely kind of take all of us into the virtual world. Nobody would be kind of really interested in the real world. Unfortunately, my feeling is even somebody, like our age probably would be immersed in something like that, right? So I have a mixed feeling about all this, but I think the opportunity here is that well, we can play games with a high bandwidth information coming at us in a format that we really consider very, very pleasurable aesthetically, or whatever different kind of reasons might be, right? And then that's going to be our maybe corporate world, right? I mean, if I have a bad boss, I will have that buffer between me and the corporate world that is going to be the generative video game, and that's where I'm going to live. My output is going to be still going forward to the real world. Maybe I'm going to write a better memo. Maybe I'm going to write a better program with all those avatars. Maybe I will have Commander Data from Star Trek kind of helping me out, and that's going to really make me a great programmer, right? Because I would love to write programs with Commander Data, and then that will kind of be my contribution to the real world, which maybe is going to be something that will make the universal basic income kind of like a moot point, because I still can contribute, I can still be paid, but I have that buffer around me, which is that world that I want to create.
No, and I kind of think we live in that world right now, don't we? I mean, well, because I think the modality of it might be interesting, because I'm not obviously I don't rely upon video as being, I think of it like it's like my music problem, right? The tone is too difficult, right? Like if it was a uh, uh, whatever that thing's called, a crayon drawing that could talk to me and write or something like that, then fine, right? Like I've tried those, by the way, and they're all just truly awful, right? Anything you're trying to convert into like a diagram or something like that, it's almost comically bad at it for some reason, because it seems easy to us. And that's why I keep thinking is we're really, really good at doing some things that are incomprehensibly difficult to explain, right? Just navigating this world, I keep thinking, is practically impossible, right? If you didn't have, what would we call it, 2 years to learn how to walk, you see what I mean? Like that's a outstanding amount of training. You see what I mean? Because that action alone is really comprehensively, it's very difficult, you know?
Yeah.
And still, as a kid, you're constantly falling downstairs and smashing into things in your bike. You know what I mean? But fortunately, you're compact and usually, protected enough
Mm.
to not have the earth kill you right away. Right? But if you're an animal, no, you come out and you're pretty much ready to go get food right away, right? Like they don't have time, they don't have years to learn this incredibly complex skill, right? But at the same time, we're not asking AI to model bird thoughts or whale cognition. You see what I mean? Like we're kind of we're very narrow in the way we think of it as being able to do things. But like you said, in a video game world, you can do anything, right? You can be a whale and you can live on Mars, right? But I think that isn't as appealing as it sounds for people, if that makes sense, right? Like I think the wanting to be out of the world that we live in doesn't make any sense to me. Like this is the greatest world ever. Like, right? Like, like we don't need to live in Star Trek. And hopefully we don't live in Star Wars because that I hate that Star Wars crap. I'm in the Star Trek camp. I'm just like these are all just metaphors for us getting along with each other and prospering together, right? So, rather than fighting each other all the time and having to deal with Darth Vader's crap or whatever, I don't know why everyone seems to like this conflict model, but maybe that's too much. Didn't mean to contradict you.
No, I think that the function of our understanding of the world kind of depends on so many parameters. I mean, we are maybe happier, right? We have great families, we have great jobs, we are kind of doing what we love. So our outlook is very positive, right? I mean,
Right.
I'm completely with you, but I'm pretty sure can imagine people who are in a totally different situation.
Oh,
where,
100%, right.
and they wanna escape, right? And there is maybe
Oh,
permanent escapes. Like people say, hey, the permanent solutions to a temporary problem, but then they may want to have a temporary solution to a temporary problem or a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Like let's say let's say you don't have the education, right? Let's say you kind of feel like you're stuck, right? And then you see the pressure and the economy and everything else. I can certainly see kind of people who would want to kind of have an option B, right? And that option is coming quickly, very quickly, because maybe it's going to be the glasses, maybe it's going to be something, some other technology that will come up, or maybe it's just going to be a screen with this very high level of interactivity that we are trying to kind of think, like next level gaming environment. So yeah, not sure, but yeah, to you and I, yeah, this world is great, right? There's opportunities. There's kind of like beauty. We enjoy music. We enjoy real live music, for example, right? And so that might be I hope I'm wrong, right? But that may not be the majority of people.
Well, if we can extrapolate, because you're absolutely right, and certainly we all know right now of people who are living not in any sort of perfect world, right? And these are actions certainly that if given critical thought, there could be better actions, right? But as we can kind of unpack, and this is another thing, is like if we unpack this prisoner's dilemma thing and the idea of defection versus cooperation being much more effective in the short term, that's where I like this long-term thinking. Whereas if you are in it for the long haul, maybe that's why we can have some satisfaction in life. We finally made it long enough that we don't have to we don't have to fret about it anymore, right? Like it's like, okay, yeah, everything seems chaotic based on your own place in this world, and but I talked to some talked at length to some people who are very change oriented, right? They want the climate to be fixed. They want, energy to be X, Y, and Z, and have no problem with that other than, as I said, this sort of the dichotomy that you need people to literally actively cooperate, right? They have to they have to not be in a computer world. Although I'm still curious, like, because you and I spend so much time in the computer world, I'm assuming this only matters to a very small subset of people still, you know what I mean? They all live in the real world and computers are just sort of a thing or a nuisance, whereas they have, they have to make things actually work for them in life, right? Like they have to get the kids to school and all the things I can certainly recall, but I lived in a time where computers were just sort of a novelty, right? And not a viable alternate world to live in, that's for sure, even though I did spend a lot of time in them. I never could be fooled, that's what I'm saying. And I'm sort of curious, is that your vision? Like that somehow we would just have a more compelling alternate universe that was, I mean, this does sound an awful lot like, did people have jobs in, what was that movie, the Spielberg movie, the book about the video game guy who had the second world, whatever, everybody had the goggles and they lived in dystopia. What the heck is the name of that movie? Oh, you know this.
Ready Player One? No.
No, it's the one where the guy has to find the. Anyway, they live in this virtual universe. Anyway, it was the pop version of Snow Crash. Let's put it that way, right? Like everyone lives in dystopia, but all the economics happen in virtual reality, right? What was it called? It's
that was Spielberg's. That was Spielberg's movie.
Spielberg's movie, yes. It had a lot of video games in it. Because the creator of this world died and the guy has to figure out where he hid all the money or something. It's like a Willy Wonka thing. Hold on, Spielberg. It's very recent. It is called Ready Player One. That's why.
Okay. Oh,
okay. Yeah. Sorry. So just so I'm understanding, are you saying we'll live in a Ready Player One universe, but we get paid?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of depends.
I'm not against it,
on the definitions, but yeah, the Matrix. I'm not suggesting that we are in the Matrix, but I'm suggesting
this would be an alternate. This would be like you said, if you could escape your reality, but have a fully, like you said, fully immersive world that you could also get paid to do things in.
Well,
that's not, it's not bad. It's really, it's kind of what we have now, right? Except that we have to kind of have a modality. I was just the other day, like, what was it? Well, anyway, I'm going along and there's two people. Oh, it was out in front of a high school, and there were people who were just kind of making sure everybody was getting out of school properly or whatever. So they're both sitting there as sort of like security guards, and both are glued to their phones. So what I kept thinking was, that's reality, right? Like you have to exist there just in case something happens, which likely never does. But now you have this alternate world you can live in, right? Where you can just do whatever you want. I don't know that you need goggles though, do you? I mean, this is the thing, but you don't get paid. Unless you're sitting there, live streaming, maybe you can get a few followers.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
I'm not putting you on the spot.
What I can tell you is that my son likes to have his VR goggles for a very long time on, to the point that he goes to sleep with his goggles on.
Oh,
and
okay.
when he wakes up, his goggles are still on. So I think that is telling me that he wants to be in that alternate world. Okay. There is something that is kind of, and it's not like he has a bad life or anything like that. But
right.
Wants,
which one?
He wants, my Liam.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, Liam
I'm
wants
just
wants to
curious
do that.
because the younger one,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah,
I
so
think
you
it's a
tell me, right?
phase. I think it's a phase. Kids. Come on, kids.
Yeah, and he's got how this all the motion set up, right?
Sure.
So it
Yeah.
can react to his, to the wrist. He got those transmitters on the wrists, on the body, so he can be
Sure.
fully immersed or as much as possible, in his virtual world. So yeah, so I don't know. It looks like if he is like that, there is going to be a very big part of society, at least in his demographic, that will be similar.
Just need to figure out how to monetize it, right?
I guess, yeah. So yeah, there is or create, yeah, and monetize. So what I'm encouraging him is to kind of do VR development,
Create
because
content.
that's, yeah, basically that, yeah. So yeah, so I don't know. Maybe the quality of those VR headsets will go up and up. The resolution will keep going. The form factor will be, smaller and smaller. Right. You have audio, right, that kind of can, and kind of isolate you from everything. So yeah, that's definitely
Well, I mean, there's certainly, I think, 1,000,000% super creative things happening. I heard, by the way, on this particular topic, Apple has a new sound codec that they had to invent. And I'm a big fan of Atmos, right? But they're like, no, this is a very hyper specific sound model, because what they're inventing right now is basically widgets for Apple Vision, but the widget could be, let's say, a clock, right? Like it just sort of sits on the wall and it looks like a clock. And in all, for all intents and purposes, it's a clock. But they had to invent this sound model, because what if this clock makes sound? You see, and it's really interesting because, well, then if you can model, which you can, right? You can model sound. If you have a really detailed model, then you could say the sound is coming from that clock, and you don't cognitively have to know that, right? You know that rather than it just being like, oh, there's a noise coming from wherever, right? Like that's where it's really interesting to imagine these sort of hyper localized things. I mean, it's a lot different from human models, right? But these sort of models actually seem useful, like widgets, so to speak. Like what could a thing do in space? But I don't know that most of these VR headsets, they usually have their own world, right? Like you're in that world of the game, whereas this is trying to create a world of computing that doesn't have necessarily a frame, right? It could be, here's my stereo, right? And I'm going to go over, and my stereo pretty much acts like a stereo, or it's a simplified version of it, right? Or here's so they're trying to actually place computing in space, which I think is a really interesting model. And I don't think everybody's holding their breath for it, but you know what I mean? It still kind of lends itself to what you're saying, is that you could be in that hotel room in Munich, you put on your Apple goggles, and suddenly your room is now mapped to this other place, and your conversations, because they're trying to get like more of that conversational model where people, their whole faces are generated, but they look like themselves, and they have the eye, that's why they have the eye thing, is they have really, really detailed eyes because people found out, like, we don't look at people's mouths when they talk, right? And that the eyes and how those act give us all the clues we need in order to have a more in-depth combo, kind of like we're doing. See, like you have to have this thing of where you're still designing around the signal, the surprise. We'll wrap it up with Shannon again, right? Like that's where the surprise comes, right? Your ears are not going to change shape, your hair is not going to stand on end when we're talking, right? But your eyes will tell me that it's time for us to go.
with a little bit of snoring to amplify the effect.
Absolutely. Yeah, eye rolling aside, right?
No, I mean there's similar things going on
Yeah.
also in the gaming world. So my son also is telling me that they are modeling sounds. Obviously, directionality comes into play, but they are also modeling sound as if you are wearing a sound suppressing headphones. Those that you would have, to kind of like protect your eyes, in a loud environment. So they are now moderating that effect, and delivering to the player, because you can select, what kind of gear you have on you, including the ear protection, what kind of sound suppression you have. So yeah, so this is all kind of going slowly into, really
No, I
deep
mean, well, it's brand
immersion.
new. I mean, this is the best model you could imagine, right? Because it's generative. It no longer has to be geometric. I guess that's my thing, right? It doesn't have to be symmetrical, and it doesn't have to be. It can be recursive, which is my new favorite phrase, right? If you've got recursion, then you have self-management. That goes back to those first models, right? The minute you put things through more than once, right, it'll start to bound this thing, and once that boundaries become emergent boundaries, right, that you can make up new words or whatever, like this is where you get into what is really interesting about the way you can use this to model a lot of fun things. But don't forget, I still think that the real world is really complicated, so don't ever discount it. Those people in spaceships, they were in Hollywood. There was gravity. You remember, these are the things we forget about Star Trek. Yeah, no, how did you manage to have gravity? How did you transport? You know what I mean? These were just ways you could easily get through, not having to have really expensive sets. You just dissolved people and then made them appear again. But we all wanted to figure out, how do we do that? It's the best. We could just be from here to there. God, I'm sure some people have singed themselves trying to do matter transferal. Let's hope not. That's not going to work.
Well, there's philosophical problems with teleportation, right?
There's way more than philosophical problems.
Yeah, but I think that as a foundation for a kind of toy problem analysis, critical thinking, to your point, yeah, Star Trek is definitely a great place to kind of like, hey, here's commander data, right? Or here's another robot, maybe like in the Star Trek Voyager series, there's the emergency medical hologram. That is my favorite character, because I'm always trying to think, okay, how I would write AI that would solve his problem. And and most of his problems are ethical, like human level, right. Kind of like
100%.
So how do I, who do I help first, right? I have two very seriously injured people, right? And I have to spend time on one injury, but the other one has to wait, right? So how do I choose, right? These kind of things. So yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, Star Trek is a great platform, and the holodeck.
Well,
right?
and just remember, it's going to undercurrent any of these sort of generational things, because remember, the outside look is still just a frame for some metaphorically interesting topic, right? Like, we cannot be entertained unless there's some subcurrent of mystery or you know what I mean? Like, there has to be the thing that we're uncovering in order to stay interested. It can't be just a surface, someone walking down a beautiful, because we've already been inured to that, right? Like, all the Marvel movies is like, well, yeah, if you just could write a plot, we'd all be interested in watching it, but instead it's just spectacle, and that's interesting. I think that's good. Spectacle worked. It works for a little while, and then it becomes boring. Right?
Yeah.
Like, if your kids are playing Cyberpunk all day long, you see what I mean? Like, sooner or later you need a plot, right? Like, it's not like anyone's going to just be, although I must say I did really like Dead Redemption, only because it's fun to have all these like little rocks and stuff that they modeled here, because it's so much like just walking around. That you don't have to have anything to do because it's so interesting looking. But it's because it's 200 years ago. The future is harder to model, maybe, right?
Yeah.
All right, Jack.
All right.
Good stuff as always. Oh, but we'll call
All
it,
right.
and
Okay.
we'll talk next week.
All right. Yeah. So thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Jack.